Hi, it's Jeremy from St George's, just introducing a video by a guy called Tim Keller, who's an American thinker and Christian. And I hope you find this video interesting. If you've got questions about who God is, why it might or might not make sense to believe in him, then do watch this, and I hope you find it useful and helpful. He's got loads of other videos, some about the Bible, some about faith, about modern life, all worth a watch, so I recommend it. Hope you enjoy this one. See you later.
Hi, thanks for having me here. It's always hard to convey a book, especially one as dense as this one, quickly, but I'll try to take about half the time conveying the book, what the book's about, and about half the time doing questions and answers. So the book is about how belief in God or religious faith or Christian faith can make sense to somebody today. It's about how it's possible for that to make sense. Now, I would like to make the case right now that should be of some interest to you no matter who you are. Chapter 1 tries to make that case, that no matter who you are, you should at least care about how people come to their faith positions, how their beliefs come to make sense to them. In Chapter 1, I make the case that there's actually two trends that are marked in the world with regard to religion. Here's the one. The one is, and I know what I'm going to say is going to sound counterintuitive to you, but the book explains, and there's really not much doubt about this, that in general, the world is becoming more religious and will for the next 30 to 50 years at least. It's getting more religious. The reasons for that, which are laid out there, are everything here is brief. You can always ask more later. Is that both Christianity and Islam are both converting people at a rate faster than the population is growing, and that's the reason why they're growing. Secondly, it's also true that religious people have a lot more children than secular people and non-believing people. So you put all that together, all of the demographic projections are that actually the number of people today in the world that say they're secular, no religious preference, is close to 17%. Over the next 35 years, that's going down to about 12% because of these trends I've just mentioned. So on the one hand, religion, the world's becoming more religious. On the other hand, parts of the world are becoming more secular than they've ever been before. Parts of the world are going to be marked by more and more people who say, religion doesn't make sense to me. Belief in God doesn't make sense to me. Now, what this means is that there's two kinds of slogans that you should never believe. One is that religion's going away. It's just not. I mean, I do hear it a lot that religion's dying out, younger people are less religious. Which younger people? Well, the people I know, okay, but you have to look at the world, and it's not true that religion is dying out, and it won't. So the idea that religion is going away is just not true. But the idea that in some triumphalistic sense, that religion will triumph, or Christianity will triumph in the world, that's not going to happen either. And since both these trends are true, religion's not going away, and yet parts of the world are going to become less religious than they've ever been. What that does mean is it should matter to us how people come to their various positions. Increasing numbers of people are finding that belief in a universe without God makes sense to them. They believe in a universe without God, and that makes sense to them. And other people are finding that belief in God and a universe filled with God makes sense to them. How do they get to those positions? We actually often do not really talk enough about that because people don't want to say, how do you get there? By the way, people who lose their religious faith usually say, I just saw the truth. And people who get converted usually say, I just saw the light. But that's not very illuminating. Instead, I'm going to make the case that the process by which we come to our beliefs, to believe in a universe without God or believe in a universe with God, are actually more complicated than that. So in Chapter 2, what I do, and I want to spend a little time here with you just for a moment to lay out what I do there, is I tackle this simplistic idea. So for example, one of the things that people say a lot, I see it on the internet all the time, and I talk to people in New York all the time, who say this, and that is this. It's a popular belief to say, Belief that there is no God is arrived at mainly through using reason. So if you come to the conclusion that there is no God, that happened through reason. But if you come to believe that there is a God, that's a leap of faith. Okay. So belief that there is no God through reason, belief that there is a God through faith. I'm here to tell you, actually, that is wrong. It's naive. It's simplistic. The fact of the matter is, both sides use a combination of reason and faith. So to press a little bit, I would put this, here's the thesis that I put out in chapter 2, and I'll try to defend it in about 4 or 5 minutes here, okay? And here's the thesis. To move from religion to secularism, to move from religious faith to a secular belief that there is a God, no God, or maybe there's no God. So to move from religious faith to secularism is not so much a loss of faith as a shift in a shift to a new set of beliefs, to a new community of faith, where the lines between orthodoxy and heresy are just drawn in different places. So if you're religious, you grew up in a church, say, your synagogue, and then you move to being non-religious, I'm a secular person, I actually don't believe in God, that's not so much a loss of faith as actually a movement from one set of beliefs to a new set of beliefs, from one community of faith to another community of faith, from one standard of orthodoxy and heresy to another standard of orthodoxy and heresy. Say, well, I know that's kind of a provocative thesis, and not most people think that. Let me show you, I think, how I can demonstrate that. Secular people that I know, and I'm not saying all of you, if you say, well, I consider myself a person who doesn't really believe in God, so I consider myself something of a secular person. I'm not saying this is true of everybody. I'm saying plenty of people I've talked to who say I'm secular or I'm a non-religious person actually have two sets of beliefs, and they are beliefs. What are they? I will call them proofism and humanism. Now, what's proofism? It's a coined word. It's not the most felicitous phrase, but I'm trying to get at this. What many people will say to me is, I'd be happy to believe in God if you could prove it to me. I'd be happy to believe in Christianity if you could prove it to me. But since there isn't any evidence, you can't prove it to me, therefore I shouldn't believe it. Now, that statement is wrong on a number of levels, and actually is a statement of faith. Wow. Well, number one, when you say you shouldn't believe something unless it can be empirically proven, the problem is that statement can't be empirically proven. For about 100 years, philosophers have pointed that out. To make a claim like that, to make a claim that you shouldn't believe something unless it's proven, is itself a statement that can't be proven. It's an assertion. It's not an argument. It's just a sweeping statement, and it can't meet its own criteria. Secondly, when people say to me, well, I could be happy to believe in God if you could prove it to me, but if you can't prove it to me, I can't believe in God. The problem is that everybody bases their lives on beliefs that they can't prove. If you believe in human rights, if you believe we ought to take care of the poor and not trample the poor, can you prove that? Of course you can't. Actually, everybody bases their lives on deep convictions that just can't be proven. So it's quite wrong to say, for example, to Christians, you've got to prove your beliefs, but then I don't have to prove my beliefs. The fact is nobody, frankly, can prove the most important beliefs on which their life is based. And thirdly, by the way, you probably would guess, especially those of you with a philosophy background, is there's not a lot of agreement on what the word proof means. See, it is true that I think most people agree it's possible to prove that substance X boils at temperature Y at barometric pressure Z. And therefore, if I can demonstrate that, then we could say that's been proven. But beyond that, how do you prove historical claims? When is a historical claim that something happened 300 years ago, when has that been proven? Or how do you prove any moral values? How do you prove that human rights are important or they're there? The answer is nobody actually agrees on what proof is, because some people say that was proven, other people say, well, how do you define proof? And so in the end, if you're a person who says, because of my rationality, I cannot believe in God or Christianity, what you're actually doing is you're assuming a set of beliefs about how rationality operates that are really a set of beliefs. And they're not self-evident to everybody. They're contested. So they're really a set of beliefs. To say I can't believe in Christianity because you haven't proven it is a set of beliefs. Then the other thing that a lot of besides what I call proofism, which is a set of beliefs about rationality which can't be proven, most secular people I know also are what you might call humanists. And humanism means they believe it's important that every human being be treated with dignity, that people's rights not be trampled upon, that we not oppress people, that we share our goods and our power with others and not exploit them. Right? When you say most, I mean, let's put it this way. Most of the atheists and most of the secular or non-religious people I know believe that. But here's a question. How do you prove that? What is that? Not only is that a set of beliefs, but frankly, those beliefs take more faith to believe in. See, if you're a Hindu, you believe the world is such that you will get off the cycle of reincarnation if you live a good life. If you don't live a good life, you keep getting reincarnated. If you live a good life, eventually you can be taken off the cycle of reincarnation and go into eternal bliss. If you believe the Bible, so if you are an Orthodox Jew or you're a Christian believer, you believe that God made the world, a loving God made the world, and you should love your neighbor so that you're like God and you can know him and you can be saved. In other words, to live a good life of humanistic values fits in with the Hindu view of what the universe is like. And it fits in with the Christian view or the Jewish view of what the universe is like. But what is the secular view of the world? It's called a materialist view, which is to say there's no supernatural, there's only natural. There's no soul and there's no heaven. It's just everything has a natural cause. So just to show the problem with that, or I'll just say the amount of faith it takes to have humanistic values with that view of the world. Last year I found this, this was written in the New York Times. It was actually a letter. It says, there are 30,000 galaxies of over 13 billion years old. So there's 30,000 galaxies, 13 billion years old, with many trillions of stars and many, many more trillions of inferred planets. So how significant are you? He's talking to individual people. How significant are you? You are not special. You're just another piece of decaying matter on the compost pile of this world. Nothing of who you are and what you do in the short time you are here will ever matter. Everything short of that realization is vanity. Therefore, or it says so, celebrate life in every moment, admire its wonders, and love people without reservation. Now, the word so, most of us think the word so means this logically leads to that. When you say so, we think that somehow what comes before the so should lead you to do what comes after the so, right? But here's a question. The first part of that statement is a bracing, wonderfully honest look at what it means to believe in a materialist universe. You're not here for any purpose. No one put you here. You came up through evolution, red in tooth and claw, you know, the strong eating the weak. Your ancestors are, you're only here because your ancestors killed weaker organisms. And in the end, eventually, you're going to die, then the sun is going to die, then civilization will die. And in the end, whether you're a genocidal maniac or whether you're an altruist and philanthropist will make no difference in the end. There won't be anybody around to remember anything that anyone's ever done. So in the end, nothing you do will matter, right? Therefore, he says, love one another. See, here's the question. If that's the case, the nature of the universe, why should I love other people? If my ancestor got here by destroying and eating the weaker organisms, why should I now suddenly become unselfish? And the answer is, if you want to believe in humanistic values, I'm glad, by the way. I am really glad. The more people that believe in humanistic values, I think the better the world will be. But it doesn't follow from your view of the universe at all. It's a huge leap of faith, unbelievable leap of faith. It doesn't take huge faith to go from the Hindu view of the universe to humanistic values, or from the Christian view of the universe to humanistic values, but it does from the materialistic, the secular view to humanistic value. You can believe them, but don't tell me that that's not a leap of faith. It's an enormous leap of faith. And you know who's going to tell you? Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche is going to say, and this is what he did say, and he argued incredibly, I would say, in an incredibly convincing way. He would say, if you say, I'm an atheist, and then you say, but we should not starve the poor, and we should treat everybody as with and honor their equal rights. He says, you're still a Christian, whether you admit it or not. Because he says, those ideas came historically into the Western society when people believed in the Christian understanding of the universe, that you're here for a purpose and you're made by a loving God and you're made in the image of God and all human beings are children of God. He says those values made sense when we believed the Christian view of the universe, but we don't believe that anymore. And therefore, if you hold on to those values, you're actually being a Christian and a very, very inconsistent person, even though you won't admit it. And I don't think you can answer Nietzsche. So now here's where we are. Fundamentally, there are no irreligious people. At one level, absolutely everybody has a set of beliefs, including secular people, and irreligious people have a set of beliefs about the universe that A, you can't prove empirically, B, are not self-evident to most of the rest of the world. See, even if you can't prove something, sometimes you can say, but everybody knows that. Well, you can't say that about any particular set of beliefs about the universe. So in other words, you can't prove them. If you're a secular person, your beliefs you can't prove. B, your beliefs are not self-evident to most people in the world. And C, as I'm going to show you here in a second, is your beliefs have as many contradictions and problems that attend to them as any religious faith does. So what does that mean? Does that mean, there's no way to know the truth? No, 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 no. See, I'm trying to say everybody gets to their position. Religious people and irreligious people get to their beliefs, because in the end, what you hold is a belief, by a combination of reason and intuition. So for example, how do you use your reason to come to a conclusion? One is you look at the logical consistency of your beliefs. That's using reason. Another thing you asked, do the things I believe fit in with what's out there in the world? Does it fit in with what I see happening in the world? That's using reason. But then there's also a part, frankly, everybody to some degree or other also uses their emotions when it comes to believing what they believe. And they also look socially. They say, I see other people who have these beliefs, and how's that affecting their life? So basically, the way any particular set of beliefs comes to make sense to you is for emotional, cultural, and rational reasons. It has to make sense to you emotionally. It has to make sense to you socially, culturally. You see how the belief fleshes out in the lives of other people. And then thirdly, it does have to be logically consistent, and there does need to be rational reasons too. And so everybody uses those three things to get to their beliefs. Now, what I do in the rest of this book, and the other book's already been mentioned, The Reason for God, is I lay out mainly in this book the emotional and cultural reasons why Christianity tends to make sense to a lot of people. And then at the very end, I start going into the rational reasons, the more traditional kind of arguments for God and Christianity. But I start it, but on the other hand, I finish it, you might say, in The Reason for God. So if somebody asks me, what's the relationship of making sense of God to Reason for God? They say, is Making Sense of God a sequel to Reason for God? I said, no, it's a prequel. Because basically, the way we get there is we use our emotions, we use our relationships, and we use our reason to decide what we think about the universe. Now, what I'm going to do in only 6-7 minutes, I guess, is I'm going to actually tell you what I say in these other books as the emotional and social and rational reasons why Christianity does come to make sense to a lot of people. But I'm actually going to do it as a series of assertions. Now, this could be infuriating to many people, so I'm really hoping that here at Google, we're all civilized and you don't rush the podium snarling at me, because I'm not going to make the case for any one of these assertions. I'm going to say people who find Christianity making sense come to believe this, and in the books, I actually lay out all kinds of reasons for why. So in other words, nothing I'm about to tell you is really groundless. It's just going to they've all got, in the end, if you read the books, you might disagree. But what I'm saying is not arbitrary or groundless, okay? None of the things, they're all kind of worked out in the books. But if I was going to make a case in 5 minutes, which I am, for why Christianity can make sense for a lot of people and how it makes sense for a lot of people, I would say Christianity comes to make sense for us when we see three things. When we see the faith it takes to doubt it, that is Christianity, the faith it takes to doubt it, the problems we have without it, and the beauty we see within it. Now, what do I mean by that? First of all, fast here, the faith it takes to doubt it. One of the ways in which people who are doubting Christianity come to embrace it is when they realize that all their doubts, every one of their doubts, is always based on a leap of faith, which is harder to justify than the thing they're doubting. Follow that? Wasn't that easy? No, I didn't. In other words, every time you say, I doubt Christianity, your doubt is based on actually an assumption of faith, which itself needs to be justified. Very often it can't be. So let me give you three examples. Number one of the objections I hear to Christianity all the time is there can't just be one true way to believe. There can't be one true faith. There can't be one true way to God. There just can't be one true way to believe. And here's the problem with that. How do you know that? I mean, that's an assertion, not an argument. How do you know that there's not one true way? The only way to know that there's not one true way to God would be actually if you have the ultimate perspective on truth that you just said nobody's allowed to have. And actually, what that means is that you are your doubt is based on an assessment of your perspective, which actually is a major leap of faith, and I think is hard to justify. Here's a second one. People say, I can't believe in a God who allows such evil and suffering. Now, by the way, I'm a pastor. I am not a scholar. I'm not an academic. I'm not a person who mainly does thinking. I'm a pastor. So I've walked with plenty of people through horrible suffering. So what I'm saying here, I do not mean to be so cursory. I told you this is the problem with what I'm about to do. But here's the point. When someone says, I can't believe in God because he allows such evil and suffering, what you actually are saying is this. Because I can't think of any good reason why God would allow evil and suffering, therefore there can't be any good reason. Because I can't think of it, he can't possibly have one that I can't think of. See, the only way to walk away from God is to assume there can't be a good reason. And why can't there be a good reason? Because you can't think of it. But why in the world, if there is a God, couldn't he maybe he's got an idea that you don't have? And you see, ancient people, philosophers have pointed out that ancient people, though they struggled with evil and suffering, never thought evil and suffering was a reason not to believe in God. You know why? Because they were humbler about the human reason. We are not so humble. We have an assumption that we have the powers of exhaustive surveillance, that we should be able to look at the universe, and if we can't think of anything, I mean, our ancestors would never have been this arrogant. Because we can't think of any good reasons for evil and suffering, therefore there can't be any. So you see, you're actually assuming something. You have a doubt, but it's based on a faith in yourself, which is, how justifiable is it? Here we give you one more. There are lots and lots and lots of objections to various parts of the Bible. And you need to realize that virtually all the objections you might have to things the Bible teaches are based on high faith in your culture and the superiority of your culture. So, for example, years ago, not too long ago, I once talked about Christianity to a Chinese graduate student, brilliant young man. It was in Britain when I was at the time. And you know what? He had no problem with the idea that God would send people to hell. No problem at all. Because he says, I'm not a Westerner, and I said the idea that God might have the authority to send people to hell doesn't bother me. He said I have no problem with that exercise of authority. But he says, what I can't accept is this. The individualistic nature of Christian salvation means that if I believe in Jesus Christ, I would not be with my ancestors. And I don't want to believe anything that would separate me from my ancestors. Now, my guess is the average Manhattan young professional that's not the main problem they have with the Bible. Okay, I talked to a Middle Eastern intellectual over there. And what she believed, interestingly enough, was she says, I have no problem with the idea that God would send people to hell. No problem at all. If there is a God, why couldn't he do that? He created us. Doesn't he own us? Why? But then she said, but she cannot accept what the Bible says about forgiveness. this idea that we are obligated to forgive no matter what the other person has done, that we have to forgive. And you know, even though most young Manhattanites don't think about the difficulty of that, generally speaking, that's another reason why it's probably not the average New Yorker's problem with the Bible that it talks about forgiveness too much. However, the average New Yorker is going to say, I just can't accept a God who would send people to hell. You know why? Because at that moment, what you're saying is, my cultural location is superior to theirs. My culture is absolutely right. And it's never going to change. You know, for all you know, 100 years from now, your great-grandchildren will think that your approach to things is stupid. In fact, inevitably, they will, by the way. If the record of your political views is somehow preserved, your great-grandchildren would think you are horrible. And yet, on the basis of your cultural location, which you're kind of absolutizing, on the basis of your historical moment, which you're kind of absolutizing, you're going to throw the whole Bible over. See, every doubt of the Bible is based on incredible faith in something else which is really hard to justify. Faith that takes to doubt it. Do you see that? That's virtually always, Christianity starts to make sense when you begin to see what incredible faith it takes to doubt it. Secondly, the problems you have without it. Now, I'm really going to be fast, but here's the point. There are emotional, cultural, and rational problems with not believing in God. Now, here I'm kind of going at secularism, and of course, you do have to weigh Christianity and other religions and secularism, but I don't have time for that, unless you want to ask me about it. But here's the problems. Number one, if you don't believe in God, there is a problem with meaning, because the meaning that you create for yourself will be too thin for you to handle suffering. The secular culture, unlike religious cultures, make you find your meaning in life in something here, which means suffering can take it away. And every other culture, whether it's Hindu or Islam or Christian, or whatever, every other kind of religion helps you locate your meaning in life outside of this life so that suffering can actually help you accomplish your meaning in life. But if you're a secular person, suffering will destroy your meaning in life. And secular culture gives its members less resources to deal with suffering than any culture in the history of the world. And we are much more traumatized by it. Number two, just these. Secularism, the idea there's no God, gives you a view of identity which is incredibly fragile. Every other religion says you find who you are by connecting to something more important than you. The secular culture says you find your identity by looking inside and doing whatever you think you want to do most, and you assert it over and against everybody else. And lots of studies have shown that that kind of identity, which is really unique, it's not the way it works in the rest of the world or in history, makes you incredibly fragile because you desperately need a kind of recognition that it actually can enslave you. Thirdly, it's not just a problem of meaning and a problem of identity. There's also the problem of freedom. Modern culture defines freedom as the absence of restrictions. Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, said there's two kinds of freedom. There's negative freedom, there's positive freedom. Negative freedom is freedom from. Positive freedom is freedom for. Negative freedom simply says, I'm only free if I have no restrictions at all. And I hope you all know that means if that's really what freedom is, then that is antithetical to love. Because the more committed your love relationship is, the less free you are. And yet, by the way, the more you are in a wonderful, committed love relationship, generally, the happier you are. The fact is, we've got a culture and a belief set that doesn't support positive freedom. It only supports negative freedom. And as a result, freedom actually tends to eat up love relationships. And it's one of the reasons why we have fewer and fewer lifetime committed love relationships, because the view of freedom that comes from highly individualistic view that goes along with the secular view undermines that. There's a whole lot of emotional problems, but then there's the rational problems, and I'll just simply mention them. There's the problem, by the way, of existence itself. There are really good arguments that say it's difficult to understand, if there is no God, why there's something rather than nothing. If you want to ask me about that, we can go into it, but it's one of the problems you have if you don't believe in God. Another problem you have when you don't believe in God is the problem of moral obligation. If you don't believe in God, no trouble, accounting for moral feelings. Like, you have moral feelings, right? Everybody in this room has some things you feel, I feel this is right, I feel this is wrong. And if you don't believe in God, no problem explaining them. It could be evolution. That's why we have those feelings. Or it could be your culture has taught you those things. Or it could be an existential choice of yours, whatever. But if there's no God, it's hard to see how there could be moral obligation. See, a moral feeling says, I feel this is wrong. A moral obligation is to say, you must stop doing that whether you feel it's wrong or not. See, how can you say to another person, even though you feel it's okay, it's wrong, and you ought to, obligation, stop doing it? See, why should your feeling trump that person's feeling? Well, the only way to say that is to say there's a higher law, there's something outside, there's a moral source outside of both of us, and we all have to honor that. But what could that be if there's no God? You know, Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous letter to Birmingham jail, put it like this. He said, if there's no higher divine law, if there's no God, no higher divine law, there would be no way to tell if a particular human law was unjust or not. Because it would just be my feelings versus your feelings. Big problem. Lastly, the beauty that we find within it. Christianity has a beauty to it. I mean, first of all, there's the idea that God, the Christian idea of God is that God is not an individual, but God is a trinity of three persons who've known and loved each other from all eternity. And you all know, if you're ever even into a if you're into a love relationship, that's when you're really the happiest. So if you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, according to the Christian teaching, having perfect love relationships for all eternity, they were utterly happy, totally happy, you might say. Why would you create a world filled with other personal beings if you're already perfectly happy? And the answer is to share your happiness with them. There's no other good reason. You already have everything. Why would he? So the Christian idea is that God actually created us to share his happiness and love. Then secondly, the Christian story is that we turned away from him. And that's the reason why things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Christianity has a story of what happened to the universe that explains both the ruin and the glory of the human race. Any story that just looks at human beings as trash, or any story that looks at human beings as basically good and does not recognize the good and the evil in them, doesn't really account for how things are. It doesn't lead you to expect what's going to happen tomorrow. And so Christianity, the beauty of the story is a God who wants to share his love and happiness with us, an account of what's wrong with us. Then thirdly, a love story. He comes into the world as Jesus Christ. Dorothy Sayers was one of the first women who ever went to Oxford, and she wrote detective novels. And one of her detectives was Lord Peter Wimsey, and she wrote a series of stories and novels about him. He solves, mysteries. At halfway through the stories, suddenly a woman shows up named Harriet Vane. She's one of the very first people who ever she's one of the very first women who went to Oxford, and she was also one of the very first, she also wrote mystery stories. So Harriet Vane character shows up in the Peter Wimsey stories. She's one of the first women graduates of Oxford. She writes mystery stories, and she's not particularly good looking. Wait a minute, who is this? Dorothy Sayers, which many people believe, looked at this character that she had created, saw how lonely he was, and wrote herself into the story out of love. And Harriet Vane saves him. And of course, the Christian story is, you might say, oh, that's sweet, what a sweet idea. The Christian story is that's exactly what God did. He looks into the world, he created, he sees us harming each other, ruining each other, and he writes himself into the story. And in Jesus Christ, he goes to the cross and dies to pay for our sins so that God can forgive us and still be a just God. If you're a judge, you can't just forgive people. The law needs to be paid. You can't just say, oh, it doesn't matter what you've done. You go off. Well, then justice falls apart. But how could God be both just and forgive us? And the answer was Jesus Christ. God, in a sense, writes himself into the story and because he loves us and does all that for us. And that's the reason why, in the end, by the way, many people, if you read the Gospels, one of the main reasons that people come to believe in Jesus Christ is they read the Gospels and they see Jesus. They see his claims, they see his humility, they see his grace, they see his courage. And you read through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you're amazed at this. And some years ago, there was a pastor I knew who was confronted by an unbeliever who said, I would believe in God if you can give me a watertight argument. And the guy said, the minister said, read the New Testament. And he said, you mean there's a watertight argument there? He says, well, not exactly. There's Jesus Christ. And he says, what if God didn't give us a watertight argument to lead us to himself? What if he gave us a watertight person against whom in the end there is no argument? Read him and you'll see there's almost no way to account for the beauty of this person, unless maybe he is who he said he is. Okay, slightly longer than I wanted to go, and also slightly faster than I wanted to go, so I'm an unhappy guy. So let's see.